adequate financial products needed by weaker economic sectors and low-income groups at an affordable, cost-fairly, and transparent way. Okay? Now, according to, if you look at the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, financial inclusion is listed as target 8 of the United Nations Development Goals. Now, the question is, why do we have, or why is financial inclusion, please change, please. Why is financial inclusion important? Now, according to Curot in 2016, Curot asserts that access to finance assists individuals and families and businesses to plan for long-term goals and unexpected emergencies. It aids with business startups, expansion, and contributes to overall economic growth. It also protects vulnerable financial groups from the clutches of greedy and selfish money lenders, or loan sharks, if you want to call them that way. However, despite all these benefits, the World Bank in 2017 stated that globally about 1.7 billion adults are excluded from the formal financial systems. Financial exclusion is greatest among poor people, and almost half of that 1.7 billion people are from developing economies. Bangladesh, China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, Nigeria, and Pakistan. So in other words, there are lots of people in Nigeria that are financially excluded. They don't have access to credit facilities to help them support themselves or probably start a business. Okay? Now, because obviously the World Bank mentioned Nigeria, in the Nigerian context, certain areas have been highlighted to have been financially excluded. Number one we have there is having access to rural banking services, those on low-income households, and those who own small and medium enterprises. Okay, now the fact must be mentioned that as far as rural banking services is concerned, the Central Bank of Nigeria in 1977 introduced what we call the Rural Banking Program for the first time to facilitate banking services in rural areas to help develop rural areas in relation to banking. However, according to the World Bank in 2021, about 42 million adults who live in rural areas in Nigeria still lack basic banking services. And the World Bank also highlighted that about 60% of rural communities in Nigeria don't have a bank branch, don't have a banking agent, and don't have ATMs. So in other words, people will have to travel from those rural areas to urban areas to have access to banking services. And if you consider someone who may be elderly, okay, who do not even have the money, enough money to even support themselves, and they'll have to spend money to travel to the urban areas, the cost involved. All right. Now, in relation to low-income households, many Nigerians on low income or who own small businesses do not have access to the formal financial system that have become fundamental to our everyday lives. And according to the Enhancing Financial Innovation and Access Group report, the report stated that the average monthly income of the average Nigerian, whether from salaries, whether from trading, whether from businesses that they own, their average monthly income ranges between 5,000 to 40,000 naira. Now, I emphasize the word naira. It's not in pounds. Okay. Now, the pound equivalent of 5 to 4,000 naira, 40,000 naira, ranges about between 25 to 45 pounds. All right. Now you're laughing. Don't okay. No, I mean from the salaries they earn, from their businesses or from whatever trade they do, their monthly income ranges between 5,000 to 40,000 naira. And if you convert that to pounds, that's roughly 25 to maybe 45 pounds a month. Now, what then happens is these people spend a fifth of that income on food, rent, transportation, children's emergencies, medical emergencies, children's education, and if anything is left, they can then maybe run the regular household. But normally or generally, nothing is even left. Now, what happens is financial institutions, banks, and other financial institutions are wary of giving them, okay, credit. Why? Because of the inadequate finance they have. Is that clear, please? Okay. So they don't give them credit facilities because of that their low income, or maybe their businesses do not generate enough money. Okay. And on the rare occasion, if they decide to say, okay, let's just have pity on you and give you credit, it's usually at extortionate price interest rates, which then makes affordability even difficult. All right. So what then happens is we now have situations where people now turn away from the formal financial system, from banks, they now turn towards informal financial systems. And we have systems like what we call something we call the alajo or the esusu in Nigeria. Now, it's a traditional language. Now, I'm going to explain what it means quickly. Now, by the esusu kind of informal financial system, it's a situation where you have a group of people, maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 people. They come together, contribute money into a pot. All right. Now they take that money and they give it to David and say, take this money, start your business, to do whatever you want to do, save or invest. Then the following month, they give it to Tammy, and it goes on and on to the last person, and then it goes to the start from the beginning again. So people turn to those informal systems to help them survive. Okay. Now, it became an issue, obviously, for the Nigerian government. So in 2012, the central bank then introduced what is called the National Financial Inclusion Strategy. Okay. In 2012. Now, this strategy was aimed to provide easy access to a broad range of formal banking services, for people. Now, the aim was to provide these services or to meet this target by 2020. But in 2020, what then happened was COVID struck. And as a result, COVID further exacerbated these problems, made it worse. So we're going to look at the impact of COVID on these areas. Can you change it, please, if you can? The impact of COVID on these areas. Okay? Now, in relation to rural banking, during the pandemic, the government came up with, obviously, like the UK, everywhere in the world, they said, all right, for safety reasons, everybody stay at home, don't go to the bank, just, for safety reasons. Now, people were advised not to go to the banking hall, rather they should use ATMs. But the problem was, like I said previously, when you have 60% of people in the rural areas who don't have ATMs, as a result of COVID lockdown, people became stranded. On the rare occasion where they were able to, for example, use ATMs, all right, the ATMs sometimes don't even have cash. There was no money in them. One reason was because the banks were fearful, security reasons, the ATM could be broken into and the money carted away. So sometimes ATMs in those rural areas don't even have money in them. All right. And when they even had money in the ATMs, what happened was, according to reports, you see long queues of people trying to get money from the ATM during lockdown, obviously, and many people were not observing the distancing guidelines, further spreading COVID, if that makes sense. Okay. Now, also, as far as low-income households are concerned, COVID also had an impact. According to the World Bank, about 42% of people who were working before COVID stated that they were not currently working or they had stopped working as a result of COVID. And those people said when they stopped, their employers did not support them. Like the government, the UK government, for example, there was this furlough scheme encouraging employers not to lay off staff. It was the complete opposite, that where workers were being, well, the lockdown meant people were not working, employers did not pay them because they were not working. Okay, so what then happened was, those people then relied on savings. I just give us an example of this Isusu thing. When that doesn't work, they relied also on borrowings or gifts from family and friends to survive as a result of COVID lockdown. Did I change that? Can you go back to the previous slide, please? Yes. Now, as far as SMEs are concerned, the World Bank also stated that as a result of COVID, the commerce, services, and agricultural sectors were impacted. About 79% of the commerce, services, and agricultural sector, their incomes were impacted because of COVID. And also, a report from the Faith Foundation also showed that about 94.3% of Nigerian businesses in general suffered cash flow, sales, and revenue problems because of the pandemic. And again, back to what I said earlier, when businesses or individuals can generate money or enough money, 25 to 45 pounds, banks or any other financial institution are loath to give you credit because of fear of repayment. And if they ever give you, it's going to be very, very high interest rates. Now, the argument was therefore made that where people cannot have access to adequate financial services or adequate finance to help them, there may be human rights implications. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the argument was made that, look, there may be human rights implications where people are financially excluded. And you know, if you look at, for example, there was, did you skip that slide? No, this one here. This. Yes, that one there. Thank you. Now, if we look at the definition of human rights, the UNICEF defined human rights as standards that recognize and protect the dignity of all human beings. Okay. Now, these rights range from the most fundamental, the right to life, to adequate standard of living, such as food, education, work, health, and safety, to the right to development. So I'm going to look at one of those rights and see how the impact it had on financial exclusion, if you like. Okay. Now, could you go to the next slide, please? Now, if you look at Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it espouses that every human being or human person and all peoples are entitled to participate in, contribute to, and enjoy economic development. Now, the right to financial inclusion is particularly relevant to this particular right in the sense that such empowerment enhances the capacity of the poor to develop themselves, to learn a trade, and to fend for themselves without the need of having to degrade oneself. For example, people turning to criminal activities, forced labor, and other forms of illegal activity. Access to finance would help low-income individuals start an entrepreneurial activity and thus increase the number of new business startups engaging in income-generating activity. And I particularly like the words used by Henry Shue. Henry Shue says, no one can fully enjoy any right that is supposedly protected by society if he or she lacks the essentials for a reasonably healthy and active life. So in other words, when people in Nigerian society, when they are financially excluded, they don't have access to these credit facilities or support from financial institutions, then it goes against the very spirit of Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So, and also I like the words used by, can you go to the next slide, please? To Akemoglu and Robinson. In relation to economic development, Akemoglu and Robinson stated that economic development requires the government to adopt policies which support financial inclusion. Now, what are some of those policies that the Nigerian government can look at in a post-COVID Nigeria to support, next slide, please, to support, to promote financial inclusion in Nigeria, at least to meet Article 1 of the UDHR. Now, my suggestion, and this is the developing paper, my suggestion is there could be regulatory reforms. Now, regulatory reform, I'm looking at it from the perspective of amending the Nigerian Finance Act of 2020-2021. If you look at that particular act, it talks about companies paying taxes and every other thing, but it doesn't necessarily mention financial inclusion. So my question is, to promote financial inclusion, that act to be amended. How? Take, for example, those on low incomes. All right. If the act is included to, say, for example, the government decides to give tax subsidies, okay, or tax rebates to banks and other financial institutions, okay, that support rural development, they may be entitled to having tax rebates or tax subsidies from the government. So if a bank or any financial institution can show that they've got banking agents, they've got ATMs, they've got other financial services, they could have, apply for tax subsidies from the government or tax rebates. And we're talking about millions here. Okay. The government can also have what is called, again, soft loan schemes for small and medium enterprises. Well, people who own small businesses, can get loans from the government, from financial institutions, guaranteed by the government with little or no tax at all. Okay, and also adequate funding and support from government and external organizations for cooperatives to support those on low incomes. Now, in Nigeria, cooperatives work in local communities. Okay, now a lot of them close, and report has shown that, look, cooperatives shut down and close or become insolvent because of a lack of government funding. Okay, because cooperatives are very fundamental to supporting people in Nigeria, particularly those on low incomes. Adequate government funding may be a way to promote financial inclusion in Nigeria. Thank you very much. Any questions, please?
Yes, we want to thank Dr. Dabor for that insightful discussion on financial inclusion in Nigeria. And I think we'll start off with we'll just take the questions at once. So does anyone else have any questions? Yes, 1, 2. Anyone else? Questions? And 3. All right. So we'll take all questions at once. So
thank you very much, Dr. Dabor, for that presentation. With regards to your recommendation in terms of government providing kind of support for citizens, there have been some initiatives in Nigeria, like you win. I don't know what the vice president was distributing trader money and all that. Now, sometimes you ask yourself, where does all that support go to? So if that your idea should be implemented, how do you think the right people will get the right support?
I think.
Wait.
Okay, sorry.
Yes, next question.
Thank you very much. Given that my husband is Nigerian,
thank you very much.
My son is a half Nigerian. It's quite sad to hear what's going on in Nigeria. It's quite sad. So, getting to the point again, obviously don't stop me. In the previous speaker was saying that majority of Nigerian people are under poverty.
Yeah.
And it's to me it's quite difficult to achieve the financial inclusion.
Yeah.
Now my question is in order the regulatory framework that you suggested, do you really think that will achieve the financial inclusion in the first sense? For instance, do you think that will achieve to give the ATM a small village in North Nigeria?
Okay.
Good question. And one more question.
Yes.
Okay. I think I hope it doesn't take it away from the real context. So my idea about the financial inclusion you're looking at is see how to make it some sort of a right, so because when you talk about the human rights implication, are you trying to espouse some sort of idea that you made a link to right to healthy living or right to development or something, economic right, if I use that. So are you looking to say that if you introduce some sort of human rights element to financial inclusion would help to solve some of these kind of inadequacies in the way people should have access to
Okay. Because hand up.
Yes. So my own is just an emphasis on the unsecured credit transaction which you mentioned about.
Yeah.
I know well, it's unsecured, so probably the state does not control it.
Yeah.
I know it's something that has worked effectively. Although I know a lot of things have changed. Time, my friends were growing up that was used mostly and it worked effectively.
Yeah.
So and I know it's based on trust and so I don't know. Do you see any potential for that to be inclusive, a part of the inclusive paradigm?
Okay.
Or it must be controlled, state regulated, and sanctioned by law for it to be inclusive?
Okay, so I'm going to try and answer the question together as much as possible. Now, in relation to the people, how do we monitor the right people? Again, this may be where technology may help. Say, for example, having a database or something where people are one of those companies apply, okay, for that particular help or support from the government, and of course they have to apply for it, and the government goes through their financials and everything else to look at how much they're earning and whether they qualify. It's not a free for all. It's not a socialist, system. It's a situation where people can apply for it, and there could be a body that would then determine if you qualify for that and for that support, given your income, looking at your bank statements, looking at how much you generate and things like that, to know if you qualify for it. Now, in relation to about if I don't know if I answered the question. Now, in relation to northern having an ATM or banking services in northern Nigeria, what was the question again? So I'm trying to remember.
Do you think that the change of the regulatory framework will achieve that problem that the local has?
Yeah, it may help. It could help solve that problem, in the sense that, I mean, northern Nigeria geographically is very vast, and like I said, and I think northern Nigeria in particular is one area, is one part of Nigeria that needs, if you like, that sort of support in that sense. So if companies can show that they are promoting banking services within that area, and it's obviously it's in regulation, of course, then they can then apply for the rebate. It could generally work. And not just in northern Nigeria, every part of any rural area in Nigeria, where, I mean, the banking industry is huge, and they make trillions of naira every, maybe every year, maybe every month. Okay, now if they can show that they promote financial inclusion in these rural areas, it could work given regulatory amendments. And to your question, Prince, about whether it is, did you say if it's a right or something? Now, yes, I mean, part of my argument is it should be treated as a right, because the understanding that people don't have access to finance, and not because they don't want to, but because there are no sufficient jobs and they want to do it. Okay, but the system doesn't give them that opportunity to. It could, if the government treats it as a human rights issue, okay, it could work. It could work. To your question, Lee, just to remind me, please.
Unsecured credit transactions, whether
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you rightly said. I mean, you rightly hit it on the head. Back in the day, governments guarantee some of these, these loans are given. I mean, if the pandemic in the UK where the government be essentially guarantees some of these loans, this furlough scheme thing. It could work if the government guarantees to say, okay, if they qualify, give them these loans, and as a government, whatever goes wrong, we can be able to have that negotiation with you. Partnership with the private industry would also work, as well. Bringing in private partnerships, having that discussion with them and see how that can work. So it could generally work. Many questions, please. Any further questions? No? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Dabor, for